Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kiilu Nyasha, and board hopping is Sydney Madison. Today is June 29th, 2015, and this is our first show of the year. I had to be absent on the 15th when I should have my usual time due to illness. Before I introduce to you my lovely guest, Rekia Jibrin, I want to send out my condolences to the Africa family, the MOVE organization, who just lost another brother, Phil Africa, who died in prison after having spent over 30 years in prison for a murder that the judge ultimately said he didn't know who killed the police officer, who we believe was killed in friendly fire. In fact, proof was the trajectory of the bullet. In any case, the prison claimed that Phil Africa died of natural causes at 59 years old. We find that very unbelievable. Long live the revolutionary spirit of Phil Africa. May he rest in peace. My guest is Rekia Jibrin, an education scholar and teacher whose research focuses on school approaches to violence, restorative justice, race, and policing. She's conducted studies on the policing of youth in the city of Oakland and in Oakland schools, and most recently completed an evaluation of the implementation of restorative justice in school settings in the Bay Area. Jibrin has taught high school as well as undergraduate and graduate courses at UC Berkeley and Stanford University. She is currently working towards her doctorate in education at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Education. Rekia is also a writer and organizer. Growing up under a military regime in northern Nigeria, and later attending a spectrum of public schools in New York, shaped Rekia's perspectives on global politics and public education. She's here to talk a little bit about the work of educators in the Bay who are organizing to address issues of police brutality, school privatization, and the attack on public education nationally. Welcome, Rekia, to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It's such a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks, Kiilu.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
Right. So let's start right off with the privatization issue that's going on in Oakland. Mm-hmm. And there's a new superintendent, Antoine Wilson, who's promoting privatization under the euphemism intensive support initiative. Mm-hmm. Would you describe that?
Sure. So I just wanted to start off by saying that last night was an open school board meeting,
right,
and there was a real show of both support for community organizing that is really challenging this idea of turning around 5 specific schools in Oakland. And these 5 schools make up Frick, Brookfield schools, and 3 historic high schools, McClymonds, Fremont High School, and Castlemont High Schools. And many of these schools have been really challenged over the years with a number of issues, most importantly that the children who are attending these schools are not getting the adequate educational support that they need to progress educationally and to graduate and to be prepared for the workforce or for college or whatever.
Right.
These schools have really gone through a lot of turnover and changes over the past few years. So we had a number of years ago the breakup of these schools into small schools with the height of the small school movement in California, and then the reconsolidation under the previous superintendent to Antoine Smith. His name was Antoine Wilson. His name was Tony Smith. The consolidation of those small schools back into one, and now Antoine Smith has come into Oakland from Denver and is saying, well, we want to...
You mean Antoine Wilson?
Antoine Wilson has come into Oakland from Denver,
right,
and he wants to turn around and improve, supposedly he wants to improve the quality of these schools. So really, there's a big question here. With all the destabilization, the the breaking apart of these schools, the consolidation of these schools. What are these children getting out of it, right? What are these communities getting out of, yet again, another reconstitution of the schools? And I think this goes back to the question about privatization, is that we're seeing a phenomena, I think, across the United States with certain bureaucratic and also political failures in public education, instead of actually implementing monies in a certain way to expand the capacity of schools to reach the high needs of these children. We're seeing cuts. There are monumental cuts happening.
The financial allocations are not
right.
what they should be.
So we're seeing these austerity measures sort of take reign in public education and have begun this sort of evisceration of public education and the selling out of it into a more private sector of corporately backed education leaders, right? So-called leaders who are coming in to improve, again, using the same type of language, improve the quality of these schools by using public funds, let's say in the form of a charter, right? Using public funds to supposedly help these children. That's the rhetoric. We want to help the children. We want to help our children. But what we're seeing is that there's so much cuts to education. There's also a high turnover in teachers, right? Causing these the further destabilization of children's education. We're seeing attacks on teachers. I mean, this is not a secret. We're seeing attacks on teacher tenure nationally. We're seeing attacks on teacher seniority, right? So they're
teacher unions.
Teacher unions. And these attacks are happening simultaneously to this, I guess what I call the selling out of public school education. And at the end of the day, where you have a rhetoric that's saying we want to help the kids, all you got to do is walk into the schools and see what's going on with the kids, right? Mm-hmm. And see the constraints. I mean, that's the thing. There are severe constraints that principals, teachers, school support staff are under in order to reach the myriad issues that the children are facing in their daily lives, and simultaneously to educate them. Right? So it's like Antoine Wilson, it would be wonderful if you could go into a classroom, and no disrespect to Antoine Wilson, but go into a classroom and try and teach our young people algebra for a year, facing the resource constraints, the community economic constraints that affect children's daily lives, right? And facing also the sort of state testing standardization expectations that teachers are facing and that children are being subjected to. Education is becoming this experimental field that seem to profit a lot of textbook companies, data enterprises, right, that can measure these standardized tests. And it seems like data seems to mean more than the quality of a child's educational experience. If we can just show numbers to show success, right, then something good has happened, as opposed to what's really going on. Are the kids really learning what they need to learn in order to be a productive citizen afterwards? And this is not an attack on teachers. This is an attack on the way we're selling out public education with this nice liberal rhetoric of care.
Right.
And those two things don't fit together.
Exactly. Because actually, if they were to improve education, the best thing, first of all, you would reduce class sizes. Right?
Exactly. Right, you would reduce,
Yes, and you'd increase the number of teachers.
Right.
And also
pay them better.
Yes, absolutely.
You got to pay teachers better.
Yes, and they should.
Better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you should have, like a smaller number of students per teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a larger size class, there should be assistants.
Right.
In the classroom to help the teacher.
Right.
There should be tutoring.
Right.
Available. But the other thing about the testing thing is, when teachers are forced to teach to the test.
Mm-hmm.
There's no critical thinking involved.
Mm-hmm.
So here again, we have a school system that's going to avoid, almost at all costs, teaching our kids how to think critically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we know that an educated populace
mm-hmm.
is difficult to control.
Right.
And this system definitely this capitalist system definitely wants to control
Right.
the uh, the student body, and also wants to control the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And what better way to do it than to privatize it, when
Mm-hmm.
have corporate people coming in, corporate capitalists
Mm-hmm.
coming in to exploit the children.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at a 50% dropout rate, high teacher turnover, all these sort of entrepreneurial projects, right, to reconstitute schools, it's just destabilizing children's experience. I mean, imagine if I always think about this. If I had a kid going to school, I don't have children, but if I had a child going to school, and every 2 years my child's school was changing and teachers were leaving, I wasn't able to develop relationships with teachers long term, right? Teachers are just moving around. In Oakland, we have something called teachers on special assignment, right, where teachers sometimes receive these slips and they just get let go, or they get transferred to other schools, and there are all these other
With
politics.
no notice?
No, they get
How
some
much
notice.
notice?
I'm not sure if it's a lot of notice, to be quite frank, but this was happening within the past 3 years, actually, under Tony Smith's regime. And this is just, again, a way to really eviscerate, in some ways, the rights of teachers and the strength of the teachers' union and their collective bargaining agreement. And I believe Antoine Wilson is so as he's putting out this intensive initiative, or this school turnaround plan, he's simultaneously going after a particular article in the OUSD, Oakland Education Association, the union's contract agreement, that directly that is trying to liquidate, in some way, seniority rights of teachers and protections of teachers to stay with children, even with these school turnovers that are to come.
Which, in itself makes you wonder, well, what is their motivation to attack teachers if they want a good education for our children?
Mm-hmm.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense, and at the same time, it's a very divisive tactic. One only had to be, you standing at the school board meeting. Everybody's a human being, but at the end of the day, when you see a school board and you see, quote unquote, nonprofits coming in support of these kind of initiatives, right? And then you see a teachers union against these types of turnaround initiatives, and then you see members of the so-called quote-unquote community come up. I mean, folks are already under economic poverty constraints. They're trying to send their kids to school. They're trying to deal with their everyday lives. Maybe they don't have a job. Maybe there are issues at home. Maybe there's issues in the neighborhood, right? And they're being, I think, the community and parents and common people in the neighborhoods are being played by this divisiveness from the school district of, like, the community and the need to provide community children with quality schools, and the contestation from the union. So it's almost splitting community and the teachers union, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so then this push against the contract, it appears, right? I mean, this push against this bargaining article around seniority rights of the contract, the district bringing that up is saying, well, teachers are the problem to kids getting quality education, right?
Right.
And so there's this divide, this tactic of division that I think is super insidious. I think it's very unethical, and it raises a lot of serious question about this empty rhetoric of care again, and of wanting to provide quality schools when you're marginalizing a workforce who
Right.
sees these children every day, who come to school despite the circumstances, whether or not they're extra dynamic teachers, but they still do it every day. They're still there for the children. They show up every day to do a job. And I mean, if we want to have quality education, you got to pay teachers a quality wage and support the teachers rather than attack them.
Supporting teachers should be supporting the students at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
If teachers are supported, students are supported.
Somebody told me, there was an activist who recently told me that 40%, like black teachers fled Oakland. So we've lost so many black teachers in Oakland. Why is that? Why is that? Well, you just have to look at the condition of teaching and the wage of Oakland teachers to wonder why there's been this mass exodus of black teachers to other school districts who probably pay them better and treat them better.
Right.
So, and also there's this
and
TFA
of course that
issue
deprives our children of having
quality teachers.
Yes,
right?
and teachers with whom they can identify.
Right. Right.
And wow.
I mean, you see this influx of Teach for America teachers, right? So Teach for America is an organization that recruits typically Ivy League students into teaching. It's almost a stepping stone before graduate school or law school for many of these Ivy League students. And what they're doing is they get this stint in a ghetto neighborhood school for 2 years, and then they bounce. But what it does is that hiring Teach for America teachers from this Teach for America organization, school districts tend to save money and they don't have to pay teachers that much money. So in some ways, Teach for America is also conflicting, right, with district hired veteran teachers who should be, we want veteran teachers. We want teachers to stay for a long time. We don't want people to come for 2 years and then leave.
Right.
Because I mean that impacts the school.
The school it and its students, children, of course.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this voluntary resolution plan of the Federal Education Department.
So over the past few years, we've seen across school districts nationally, and there have been a number of studies. There was a major study that came out in Texas that demonstrated that black and brown children are disproportionately kicked out of schools. And there have been numerous studies that show that when children are not in schools, they're more likely to be ensnared in the criminal justice system, right? And so people have called this term the school-to-prison pipeline.
It's active.
So it was so egregious, the push out of children, that the Federal Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights got involved and came in and investigated different school districts, and Oakland was facing this problem, right? And so Oakland is in a voluntary resolution plan with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to address this issue of racial disproportionality in discipline, meaning we're pushing out way too many black children, black boys in particular, and black and brown kids, right?
Right.
So Oakland has a number of initiatives, one of which is the restorative justice initiative in schools, and that is to essentially keep children in schools by implementing an alternative approach to push out in school discipline, by approaching children in a more conversational, more collaborative way to address what went wrong between a teacher or a student, between a student or a student, to get to the root of problems. That's also the sort of the way we hear about restorative justice, to get to the root of the harms that were caused.
Right.
And so people are brought together either in restorative conversations or in a restorative circle with a number of stakeholders who can support both teachers and students, or students who may be having conflicts with each other, or students who may be having a substance use issue, bringing in all these adult and youth stakeholders to support that student, to keep them in school. So in theory, restorative justice has a lot of good potential, right? Because what we're doing is we're not calling in police supposedly to deal with the children, or we're not penalizing.
Not arresting seven-year-olds like I've seen in some states.
Right, but we're trying to engage school resources and school personnel to approach children differently, in a more caring capacity.
Right.
Now,
healing, not
in a more
punishment.
Healing, right. A lot of people like to talk about the healing importance of restorative justice.
Right.
And I fully support anything. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it restorative justice, you can call it love, whatever. Right? And most restorative justice practitioners who I've met, who have been excellent people who work with young people, talk about it just being a practice and an ethic of love.
Right.
right? So you really
You
have
to
love for
really
the kids.
Love for the kids, yeah. And
You're
you
all-
want to you want to see them do well.
Right. You will be doing restorative justice kind of work, and you probably have been doing that for a long time before restorative justice came
Before
in.
they called it that.
Right. So I'm not opposed to any of that. I think for me, it's like, is this, does, in a school district context, can restorative justice actually get to the root of the harms that so many of our children that we're talking about, who are facing these, who are the subjects of these austerity measures, right? The subjects of school privatization, who are the victims of it in many ways. Can restorative justice address those harms, right? The harms of children not experiencing stable, consistent, quality education.
You know what I just flashed on, and maybe I'm off base, but I couldn't help but think about the anger management classes and stuff that they insist on prisoners, adult prisoners to,
Right.
especially when they're released from prison and so on. They have them attend, and they're parolees or something, anger management classes. Well, you're going to manage my anger, but you're not going to help me solve my problem. Like, I'm angry because I can't get a place to live. I can't get a roof over my head. You won't allow an ex-prisoner to have to access public housing or subsidized housing.
Right.
Right. You're not going to give me any, no employer is going to hire me because I'm a felon, and I can't erase my criminal past, but I'm on the up and up now, but and I'm supposed to be happy about this. You're going to manage my anger, but you're not going to solve my problems.
Right.
So it sounds to me like this is very similar. You're going to manage the behavior of the kids who are upset and angry and disturbed and because of the conditions under which they're growing up, and not developing their true potential because of the conditions. And so you're going to manage their anger in a very similar way. You're going to keep them out of the prisons and keep them in the schools. But what are you doing to change the school system, to change their living conditions?
Right.
You see, when I was in school, thank goodness, when I was going to elementary school, it was in the 40s, and as a teenager, we're talking 50s. Well, when I went to school, I loved school. I loved school. We had art. We had all kinds. We painted. We made paper mache animals and things. We had we did posters. We had music appreciation. We had dance classes. We had, in high school, in Jamaica High, we had a swimming pool. We had a full auditorium. We had music. We had everything. The glee club, choruses. They kept us so busy. Athletics and everything. We were so busy, we didn't have time to get into trouble. We had so much activity. We had after-school programs and so on. All of those things have been eliminated from public schools today. There's almost nothing to inspire children to want to go to school.
Right. And I think that is criminal.
It is.
That is criminal.
It really is.
I want to go back to what we were saying regarding restorative justice. There are a few, let me not say a lot, there are a few really, like I said, awesome practitioners who are youth workers who do restorative justice work quite well. And they do enable spaces where children can let off the steam valve, right? And that's really important.
That is important.
Just so kids can at least get through the day, come the next day knowing that at least there's a space that they can go to in schools. Right. This is good. But those very workers, restorative justice workers, face similar resource, financial, consistency constraints as teachers, because the funding for restorative justice is finite, right? This is also, we've got the involvement of nonprofits in the implementation of restorative justice, who are obviously dependent on,
for example,
foundation.
A nonprofit, for example.
Well, one of the most famous nonprofits in Oakland is the Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth Project. Organization is RJOY. It's called RJOY, and it's run by Fania Davis. Angela Davis'
Yes,
sister.
I've met her.
Yeah. So this organization has, I think, done a lot of good work, especially in the criminal justice system, in assisting other organizations, in getting juvenile judges to support efforts of diversion, right? So offering young people who have been ensnared in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, to engage in RJ work, in restorative justice work, as a diversion instead of going to prisons,
right,
or to
oh,
juvie.
absolutely.
So I think that they've made some great strides, actually, in the criminal justice system, and their work really shines in some ways there. I think
keeping
schools,
kids out of the juvenile
yes,
injustice system, I would call it. But anyway,
right, but at the same time, when you deal with schools, it's important to know the landscape of schools. It's important to know the tensions in schools, and it's important to be a school person if you're going to also bring in restorative justice to a school setting, right? Because you also have to be careful that I think that there's.
What did you mean when you said you need to be a school person?
Well, I think that it's hard to bring in. It's hard to bring in anything into a. It's important that people know what the life of a teacher is. It's, on the everyday basis in a school.
Right.
It's important that people know what is it, remember what it's like to go to school, to be a student. Mm-hmm. You have to also understand what do principals face on a daily basis? What do they have to deal with? And is restorative justice, right? Like bringing in restorative justice and saying, hey, you guys, everybody, we're gonna do restorative justice work in schools. It's very hard to integrate restorative justice work into classrooms. Unless you have skilled training, unless you have a deep fundamental commitment to committing some time in the classroom to RJ work. But teachers are, again, faced with a lot of pressures and expectations, and they're trying to do a whole lot with the kids. To bring in a program kind of model and say, well, this is going to work with student behavior is, I think it's a lot to put on one person. And it's a lot of expectation to press on teachers that really have no control over district policies and measures against the schools they're in. So like you're saying, like anger management program, you're saying, let's fix the kids, right? Let's fix the kids and their behaviors rather than their schools. It's like, let's expect teachers to implement restorative justice, and if they don't, well, they just want to be the teachers that kick out the kids. When it's like, no, teachers are also faced with a lot of crap too during the school day, right? And I was when I was doing this evaluation, I was in a classroom with a number of teachers, and in one particular classroom, I'll never forget this. The teacher was like, look, you can come in and meet the kids, but you got to help us out too. I need you to sit down since you're from the university and help the kids with their college essays. And the common application was due in a few days or something like that. And so the kids needed to work on their college essays and upload it onto the Common App, which is an online portal, right? There was no internet at the school. And so I'm sitting there being like, what the hell? Excuse me.
How are they going to upload with no internet?
How are these kids, right? So imagine you're a teacher, you're 12th grade English teacher, you're trying to make sure you're covering the curriculum, you're trying to make sure these kids are like supported, feeling inspired, feeling they can do it, feeling they can apply to college, feeling they have a future, and also mentoring and counseling the children with all the day-to-day drama that they bring in, which happens with everybody. And then you're trying to do something like get them to believe that they can do college, but they don't even have the internet to upload the college application, which is due in a few days.
That's nuts.
So this is, and so how does restorative justice deal with a child who's flipping out? Like, F this process. Nobody gives a damn about me, right? So because we're sending a message to the kids that we don't care about them. When basic stuff like that is not dealt with. Children I interviewed at another school, I was like, what are the problems at your school? When we talk about young people in urban schools, we always talk about violence and trauma. The children I asked, never once, and I interviewed 30 of them, not one brought up trauma and not one brought up violence. The first thing they talked about was, we don't have a school library. We've used the same books. Yeah. And I say, and it's like actually terrible. It's terrible when young people, the first thing they want to tell a stranger is like, look, if you want to know what the problems are at our school, is that we don't have resources. We don't have the things we need. Our football field is still really short. It needs, they're kids, and so they'll say these things. But it's like even the kids know.
Of course they do.
Right? So the kids know, and that's where it's like, RJ is awesome.
Restorative justice.
Restorative justice is awesome to, again, let the steam valve open for both adults and for children. It has to be implemented where adults get the support they need first before I think we can do it with the children, right? The adults need to feel a collective support as well at schools, because we abandon adults to deal with all the problems that the school district and the federal and state, politicians don't want to deal with. And so if the adults get the support they need, the children get the support they need. But RJ is not going to be the one solution for that.
Of course not.
Right.
Well, since we have some time, let's talk about solutions. I love talking about solutions. And I just mentioned some of them in talking about my own and history and that of everyone else who came up in the 40s and 50s when they hadn't completely destroyed the school system. Let's get some art back into the school. I understand there are efforts now. I've heard some wonderful reports recently about some jazz musicians providing instruments and trying to get music back into the schools.
Right.
Okay, that's so important.
Right.
And that we need to get dance into the schools, music into the schools, athletics, sports, handball, softball, basketball, swimming. All there's pools all over the city. There need to be after school programs. Come on now. We shouldn't have kids leaving school at 3:00 and going home to empty households where idleness is the devil's playground, as is the old adage. And of course you have kids, what we used to call latchkey kids. I guess it's the same today, because it's very difficult for parents working to struggle to pay the rents today and put food on the table to manage to find a babysitter. And then teens don't want babysitters, but they're still coming home to empty households. So and that's where they can wind up in a lot of trouble. So we absolutely have to implement after school programs if we really want to begin to restore justice and peace in our schools, because there's too much idle time. And but talk some of I'm sure you have creative ideas of what would work to solve some of the problems of these schools in deprived communities or disadvantaged communities.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, you need smaller classrooms.
Yes.
Right. Because the children can't get lost. We need smaller, more intensive, more one-on-one spaces with the children, and we need more intensive educational support for those who have higher learning needs. So we need more special ed teachers. We need tutors who have the capacity to really sustain a relationship with children over time. Right. I think there needs to be more creative solutions that involve our huge major research-based institutions, universities that are present, for example, in the Bay Area. I came from Boston, and we had Harvard, MIT, you name it. Programs that, when I was in high school in New York, the University of Albany University, would try and recruit high school students from urban areas, and they would offer to pay your undergraduate tuition and get you into medical school and pay for medical school. So there were programs set up through universities like that. I think that's really important. I was talking to a colleague 2 days ago, and she and I are in the Graduate School of Education, and we were saying it would be great if there was an option to go into Oakland schools and to set up programs where children from the 9th or 10th grade get encouraged to think about becoming teachers, right?
Yeah.
And that we recruit them into programs that support them to get through high school, right? So there has to be institutional collaboration between universities and the public school district. And there's enough research to support that this could work, right? And then offer the children tuition-free public university education. UC Berkeley should offer tuition-free to Oakland Unified School District students, right? And then while they're in college, I've been thinking about this. While they're in college, offer them teacher education courses that they can take. You know, we forget that when children get to college, they need intensive support there too, because student retention for young people from urban school districts is quite low. So just because they make it to college don't mean they stay through it, right?
Oh,
so
sure.
supporting them, maybe to integrate them into teacher ed courses, and then offering them the chance, do you want to get a master's? Get a master's. And at least give us 5 years of teaching, at the very least. And then after that, you can decide what you want to do. Maybe you want to become a lawyer. Maybe you want to be a doctor, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those are concrete solutions. We've got enough research institutions around, and that kind of work needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Divesting out of policing. I don't know why we have police in schools. I mean, if you go to Oakland schools, police are really called in when it's time to detain and arrest a kid. Police patrol around in their cop cars. But I mean, why do we invest in a relationship between the school district and the Oakland Police Department? Why is that relationship there? Why do we need police officers in school? I don't know if people in the community feel differently, but I don't see that as helping kids learn at all.
I don't think so either.
There was I spoke to
It's another manifestation of the police state we're living in.
Right. So that takes up money. $6.5 million going into, the Oakland Police Department, whereas there's less than $1 million going into school counselors. That's a problem, right?
I heard that.
Right. So we have to look at that very honestly too.
Are there any nurses in schools these days?
I think there are collaboration memorandums of agreements with health centers, but my understanding is that has been a symptom, a problem with the cuts too. I never met a nurse.
A school nurse.
I never met a school nurse,
Right.
and in Nigeria, I had school nurses.
Right. Every school I went to had a school nurse.
So that's not good, but. So the policing
counselors,
issue,
school nurses,
tutors,
space for volunteers.
Yeah, I think that there's a program with the city where children can try and get jobs over the summer, but really you want kids to be, like you said, active and not idle, right?
Exactly.
And so offering children and collaborating with the city or the county or whatever to offer kids, we need to reprioritize funding for youth jobs. I'm a big proponent of youth jobs. I did a lot of that work in Boston. Pay kids well. I'm a big proponent of raising the minimum wage, and we really have to reassess our priorities when nonprofit executives in Oakland are opposing the raising of the minimum wage.
What?
Right? Oh yeah. And so we have to wonder, what is that about too? Right? We've got this misalignment with this rhetoric of racial care. We care about our kids. This privatization issue happening simultaneously, and destabilization of schools, and then this austere approach to public good and public welfare. That's a sure solution of failure or for failure, right? So kids need jobs. I had a terrible situation. I really want to bring this up because this kind of gets at this issue of how we offer support to schools through nonprofits. I interviewed one particular feisty and super smart kid in one of these big public schools, and she was like, I can't get a job, Rekia, but there's this organization that I could try and get a job with, but you have to be involved in the juvenile justice system in order to get a job. And I came back a few weeks later. She wasn't in school. When I saw her a couple weeks later, she was like, yeah, I got locked up. And so now I'm back at school, and I'm thinking, I really don't want to make the assumption that this was a way to actually get services. And you know what I'm saying? Like for
Say
her
that
to
again. I missed something there.
Yeah. So I interviewed her, and during the interview, she was complaining that she couldn't get a job, but that the services that offered employment, the possibility for employment through a local nonprofit, required that she had to have been involved in the justice system in some way.
How old was she?
She was a high school student.
Yeah. So she's a teenager.
She's a teenager.
Right.
I came back to school a few weeks later. She wasn't around. I was trying to reach her, couldn't reach her. finally I ran into her one day at school, and I was like, yo, where have you been? And she was like, oh, I got locked up. You know what I mean? And it was such a casual thing. And I'm thinking, this child hasn't been in school for maybe 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. I see her again. She's become involved in the justice system after a few weeks before telling me that the only way to get a job was if she was involved in the justice system, right? So I'm also concerned about the role of nonprofits and the stipulations around the funding that they're getting and the quality of care they're offering children, and how that is in some way shaping a criminalized culture of kids.
Right.
Do you see what I'm
I
saying?
get it now. Yeah, and I remember too noticing that the only people who were getting help, with housing and jobs and just the basics on the outside here, were people who had been drug addicts or had been criminals, so it's true to some extent that unless you have, but if you have, you had a kind of a squeaky clean record, but you're poor as hell and you haven't got resources, there was no place for you. There was no agency for you.
Right. You're not identified as
needy. Right.
Exactly.
Even though you're needy.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it's happening.
Yes.
So I guess it's not that crazy.
Yeah.
It's also the reality. So yeah, I mean, so going back to your...
is kind of insane.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right about that. So going back to solutions, I think I think there's this culture also of adults blaming children.
Oh goodness,
right?
Yes,
And if only you'll better your behaviors or whatever. And part of me was, at one point I was like, why don't the school district and the school board members and everybody, why don't we sit in a restorative justice circle with them and have them be accountable? You know what I mean? I mean, let's just be real. Yeah, let's. There's a veil
Why
that
don't we
covers.
round up some of the torturers in the Bush administration
Right.
and do some restorative justice with.
Right, that restorative justice might look very different.
Yeah, well, they really need to be prosecuted. But anyway.
So I think so in response to the school board meeting that happened last night, I want to really say that school children came out and publicly said to Antoine Wilson, "You don't have the answers for our schools. We have the answers for our schools." And I really want to acknowledge that. It takes a lot of courage to come out. And as for young people, it takes a lot of courage to come out.
And what were some of the things that they offered?
Who, the school board members?
No, the kids.
Well, they basically were like, we need resources in our school. We need libraries. They were like, we've got great teachers.
Yes.
They were saying all the things that they had identified, right? And it's like you don't really see a lot of engagement from the school board around that. And I really question sometimes the authenticity from the school district and the school board of community engagement processes. Are we really going to see that people are actually hearing us and they're understanding that we're really impacting young people's lives? And you know what I mean? Like, I don't see I'm not sure if we're going to get a response from them. I hope we do. I hope that the children who came out last night put some pressure on the consciences of the school board members. And
what are some of the other resources besides libraries that they were demanding?
Well, they wanted their teachers to stay. They wanted consistencies with their teacher. They wanted their teachers to be paid more. They actually talked about needing their teachers to be paid more.
These are real conscious kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, I will say one thing that I appreciate about Antoine Wilson is that he seems to have the guts to hear stuff. And he seems to have the guts to at least acknowledge that people are not in line with what he's doing. Unlike Tony Smith. Unlike Tony Smith before, Antoine Wilson does engage and does...
So you see some flexibility there.
Well, I see at least he's acknowledging that people don't agree with what he's doing. And that's good. But at the end of the day, we have to see action, right?
And whether or not he's willing to make any changes.
Yeah.
if
Yeah,
there is some flexibility.
that's what really it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
And
Are you willing to bend a little bit and,
mm-hmm.
and acknowledge the, the needs of the student and
Mm-hmm.
demands of the students and make changes accordingly?
Mm-hmm.
That's what.
And rather than scapegoat the teachers, why don't you raise teacher pay so you can get the kinds of teachers you want, rather than scapegoat them and characterize teachers as the barrier to improving children's school experiences.
Yeah, I've always been, pretty amazed at how willing we are to pay sports figures zillions of dollars and teachers almost nothing. You can
Mm-hmm.
barely make a living.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense at all
Mm-hmm.
to me.
Yeah.
I mean, teachers should be valued, and I mean highly valued
Yeah.
in our society.
Yeah.
And they're not at all. They're barely respected,
Yeah.
even.
Yeah. And I mean, the life experiences of the children also need to be highly valued, right?
Exactly.
The fact that the kids many kids in urban areas are hyper surveilled by police, are hyper policed. I mean, that's something that I know the Urban Dreams curriculum that was developed a few years ago in Oakland. There was one particular, I don't know if you heard about this, but there was one particular lesson plan in it that was trying to compare Mumia Abu-Jamal and Martin Luther King and the issue of free speech that affected both, and getting kids to actually think through that in a critical way. And the police, what do they call the police union or something? The police brotherhood or whatever.
Oh,
it
yeah,
is
I remember that. Yeah, they had a fit.
Yeah, they had a fit enough to somehow get the curriculum to be taken off the website by the school district.
Yeah, I remember that. It's
This is also an attack on children's critical thinking. And I, coming from a college situation where I'm teaching college kids who need to be critical thinkers, I'm like, if you're taking away a child's opportunity to learn how to critically think like that and learn history, FYI, that's an assault on children.
Yes,
That's
it is.
an assault on children. And there was enough political organizing and community organizing, and the school district did respond to the pressures, and they did reinstate the curriculum.
Right.
So
Well,
I don't know where we're at, but
Well, again, let's get back just to sum up the issue of privatization. One of the things I remember, we tried to, start alternative schools back in the Panther, Young Lords, Red Guards, Peace and Freedom Party days, AIM. We tried to start alternative schools, and of course they couldn't last very long because of the issue of resources and so on. But at the same time, by starting alternative schools, quote unquote, you're sort of playing into the privatization
right,
issue,
right,
by kind of encouraging privatization. So I've often thought that instead of trying to start charter schools, because you want African kids to learn African history, or you want Latino kids to learn Latin American history, and so on and so forth, which is important. I think everybody should learn those
right,
histories.
right.
It should be completely integrated into our curriculum, because we should all be equally identified, and the truth of the history should be told.
Right.
And so if the history is told honestly and objectively, then we'd all be there. It wouldn't be a problem. So the public schools, in other words, people who are progressive and even revolutionary, instead of trying to separate out and give your kids, our kids, a special education, we need to get into the public school system and fight a lot harder alongside the parents whose kids can't go to alternative schools or private schools, and make sure that the public schools serve the entire community and serve it well.
Right. Right, exactly. We need
And
to
we
come
need
together.
to insist on taxes.
Right.
Being,
Absolutely. Yes.
taxpayers, especially wealthy taxpayers, paying for schools. It's insane what these high-tech companies in the Bay Area are getting away tax-free, and they're making zillions of dollars. I mean, it's insane.
Right.
You know, and paying no taxes. Mm-hmm. So our kids are deprived, and they're just flying high.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Makes no sense. What kind of community is that?
Right. Yeah, we have to really come together as a community. We have to be in solidarity together. We need to educate each other not to fall into the trap of thinking that school choice and alternatives like charterization are benefits to the community. In fact, they are somebody said it really nicely, right? We're killing youth in two ways. We're physically actually killing them with police executions of young people.
Yes.
And we're killing youth with this charterization movement.
Shooting 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds.
Right.
I mean.
Right. And we're killing youth with the charterization movement and with the monumental cuts in education. And until we can come together to fight that, we might actually see the complete obliteration of public schooling and of access to free education for all children, especially those who would be most pushed out of charter schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I thank you so much.
Thanks so much,
And
Kiilu.
we have
Thank you.
a little less than a minute. I want you to sum up, and if you have a website or anything to give out.
I would encourage everyone to take a look at the Classroom Struggle blog. I think they offer very interesting and informative and easy to access analysis. I just want to say that we really need to support our school teachers, support school children, and hold adults in school district accountable, and support and the protection of keeping our unions intact, push unions to really fight these privatization efforts, and we need to really have a campaign that saves public education.
Thank you so much, Rekia
Thanks,
Jibrin
Kiilu.
and Sydney Matterson. Please forgive my flub earlier. Thank you so much for good board hopping. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Tune in next Thursday, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiilu.